Hello, everybody. Welcome. Glad to see you could join me on the stream. Sorry I took a bit to set up. I barely got back from my sister's house. so today was a little hectic. But okay. So today I was thinking that we could do some creepy pastas again, a few spooky little stories, to get the chills running, a little bit of goosebumps. Oh, this is bound to be fun. I have a bunch of great stories for us, including a very special one that is actively scary to me even to this day. Yes, I realize I'm late, but I was at my sister's and yeah. So I was doing family stuff, you know how it is. I don't know why my model is having a hard time opening its mouth for some reason, but that might just be because I don't really open my mouth when I talk. Interesting, but not what we're here for. So yeah, we're gonna be doing a bunch of creepy stories today, creepy pastas. You may know some of them, and hopefully, we'll get those spooks, chills, and oh my god, my sister just texted me. Apparently, she's watching the stream. Okay, so yeah, that about happened. Anyways, so we got some creepy stories coming up. I just have to wait a few seconds as the music is setting itself up, and that should be good. Okay. Anyways. Okay, let's see. Which one should I? Oh, actually, this one's a classic. Let's see. Which one? Okay, it's. Oh, here it is. One of my personal favorites. An old creepypasta from 2009 that you guys may or may not have heard of. It's sure to knock your socks off. Please do not be unhinged in my chat while my sister is watching, I swear to God. Okay, so. Let's see. Where does this one start? Does anybody remember this kids show? It was called Candle Cove, and I must have been 6 or 7. I never found references to it anywhere, so I think it was on a local station around 1971 or 1972. I lived in Ontario at the time. I don't remember which station, but I do remember it was on at weird times, like 4 p.m. usually. Mike Painter, 65. Subject, Candle Cove. It seems really familiar to me. I grew up outside of Ashland and was 9 years old in '72. Candle Cove, was it about pirates? I remember a pirate marionette at the mouth of a cave talking to a little girl. Skyshell 003, subject Candle Cove. Yes, okay, I'm not crazy. I remember Pirate Percy. I was always kind of scared of him. He looked like he was built from parts of other dolls, a real low budget. His head was an old porcelain baby doll. It looked like an antique that didn't belong on the body. I don't really remember what station this was. I don't think it was WTSF, though. Jaren 2005. Subject Kendall Cove. Sorry to resurrect this old thread, but I know exactly what show you mean. I think Candle Cove ran for around a couple of months in '71, not '72. I was 12 and I watched it a few times with my brother. It was Channel 58, whatever station that was. My mom would let me switch to it after the news. Let me see what I can remember, I guess. It took place in Candle Cove, and it was about a little girl who imagined herself to be friends with pirates. The pirate ship was called the Laughing Stock, and Pirate Percy wasn't a very good pirate because he got scared too easily. And there was a type of weird, dark music that would constantly be playing in the background. I don't really remember the girl's name, Janice or Jade or something. I think it was Janice. Skyshell 033, Candle Cove, local kids show, subject. Thank you, Jaren. Memories fled back when you mentioned the laughing stock in Channel 58. I remember the bow of the ship was a wooden smiling face, with the lower jaw submerged. It looked like it was swallowing the sea, and it had that awful Ed Wynn voice and laugh. I was especially shocked to remember how jarring it was when they switched from the wooden plastic models to the foam puppets versions of the heads that talked. Mike Painter 65, subject Candle Cove. I remember now too. Do you remember this part, Sky Shell? You have to go inside. Sky Shell 033. Candle Cove local news subject. Mike, I got a chill reading that. Yes, I remember. That's what the ship always told Percy when there was a spooky place he had to go in like a cave or a dark room where the treasure was. And the camera would push in on Laughingstock's face with each pause. You have to go inside would always be repeated. With his two eyes askew and that flopping foam jaw, the fishing line that opened and closed it, ugh, it just looks so cheap and awful. You guys remember the villain? He had a face that was just a handlebar mustache above really tall, narrow teeth. Kevin Hart, subject, Candle Cove. I honestly thought the villain was Pirate Percy. I was about 5 when this show was on. It was complete and utter nightmare fuel. Jaren, 2005, subject, Candle Cove. That wasn't the villain. The puppet with the mustache. That was the villain's sidekick, Horace Horrible. He had a monocle too, but it was on top of the mustache. I used to think that meant he had only one eye, though. But yeah, the villain was another marionette, the Skin Taker. I can't believe what they let us watch back then. Kevin Hart. Subject, Candle Cove. Jesus H. Christ, the Skin Taker. What kind of kids show were you watching? I seriously could not look at the screen when the Skin Taker showed up. He just descended out of nowhere on his strings, just a dirty skeleton wearing that brown top hat and cape. And his glass eyes that were too big for his skull. Christ. Skyshell 033. Subject, Candle Cove. Wasn't his top hat and cloak all sewn up crazily? Was that supposed to be children's skin or something? Mike Painter 65. Candle Cove Experience. Yeah, I think so. I remember his mouth didn't open and close. His jaw just slid back and forth. I remember the little girl said, "Why does your mouth move like that?" And the skin taker didn't look at the girl, but as the camera turned, it would say, "To grind your skin." Skyshell 033. Subject, Candle Cove. I'm so relieved that other people remember this terrible show. I used to have those awful nightmares. A bad dream I had where the opening jingle ended, the show faded in from black, and all of the characters were there. But the camera was just cutting to each of their faces, and they were just screaming. And the puppets and marionettes were flailing erratically, and just all the screaming and screaming. The girl was just moaning and crying like she had been through hours of this. I woke up so many times from that nightmare, I used to wet the bed when I had it. Kevin Hart. I mean, actually, well, that's the actual name the guy used. Kevin Hart, subject Ari, Candle Cove. I don't think that was a dream. I remember that. I remember that was an episode. Sky Shale, 3033, Candle Cove Experience. No, 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 not possible. There was no plot or anything. I mean, literally just standing in place, crying and screaming for the whole show. Kevin Hart, subject Candle Cove. Maybe I'm malfunctioning. The memory is a little hazy because you said that, but I swear to God, I remember seeing what you described. They just screamed for hours on end. Jaren 2005, subject Candle Cove. Oh God, yeah, the little girl Janice. I remember seeing her shake and the skin taker screaming through his gaseous and horrifying looking teeth, his jaw careening so off to the side, so wildly. I thought it would come off if its wires got any more unhinged. And I turned it off, and it was the last time I watched. I ran to tell my brother, and we didn't have the courage to turn it back on. Mike Painter, 65. I visited my mom today at the nursing home. I asked her about when I was little in the early 70s, when I was 8 or 9, and if she remembered a kids' show, Candle Cove. She said she was surprised I could remember that, and I asked why, and she said, Because I used to think it was so strange that you said, I'm gonna go watch Candle Cove now, Mom. And then you would turn the TV to static and just watch dead air for 30 minutes. You had a big imagination with your little pirate show. Huh. Oh, that's this story, I guess. Candle Cove is actually a really freaky story. For those, you guys should check out the interview section of Candle Cove. It's so creepy. Anyways, I think we can get on to the next one. That one we ended a little fast. Although I talk very fast. So that might be it. Let's see. We already did this one. Oh, what about this one? Candle Cove. Yeah, Candle Cove was so creepy back in the day. I used to have nightmares about it. I mean, I remember that. Honestly, I remember that when I listened to the creepypasta, I had like nightmares because the act of like skin and stuff like that, it always creeped me out. Next story. I hope you guys like this one. This one's classic right here. If only you hadn't looked back. Though it was autumn, the day had seemed long, and the brief walk towards home short. As the sunlight began to fade, you and your two friends left the playground behind and trudged reluctantly home, knowing that you would be forced to pick up the games and conversations the next day. The next day that never came. If only you hadn't looked back, but you had. Turning just for a moment, you had glanced back towards the tree line, seen the figure of the branches clawing up towards the sky, and besides them, there he stood. At first, you thought you were mistaken, that your eyes and the hazy blur of twilight were playing tricks on you. But no, when you looked again, he was still there, taller than any man could or should be, thinner even thinner than the willow branches that extended ever upwards from the tree. He loomed in the distance like the shadow of some horrible dark truth, and you knew instantly that you had to look away, that if you didn't tear your eyes from that blank, featureless face, then soon the blank would wash over you, become you, and you would walk slowly but surely, as if pulled by some magnetic force towards him through your fear, towards him though you feared him, though you were scared of his unnatural height, the aching black whiteness of his face, the arms that seemed to stretch towards you, and the slithering tentacles behind. You turned, screwing up your eyes, telling willingly yourself not to look, not to see, not to give in, and go to him. You screamed to the others, telling them the same, telling them not to look. But as you open your eyes, you realize they had already looked. They were already gone. I guess that's a little introduction for the story. Yeah. Despite some media outlets adding to the aura of the Slender Man mythos by claiming that the figure's origins are unclear, in fact, the character's origins are very much traceable. Slenderman in his original form was created by Eric Hudson under the alias Victor Sugar. Hudson was responding to a call on Something Awful for posters to contribute digitally altered photos that would then serve as the basis for a new mythology or story. Cuthers, I can't. Okay, I'm just gonna call him Sun because that's his like last name. Sun's efforts, posted on January 10th, 2009, showed groups of teenagers and children with the now familiar figure of Slenderman standing in the background. At first glance, the images seemed normal, but the figure's an anomalous size, and the featureless face once noticed gives the picture an eerie and unsettling feeling. Alongside the image, Sun provided small snippets of context, text prompted to be witness accounts that give hints about the scene depiction and their relation to the anomalous figure of the Slender Man. By attaching short snippets of text with his images, Sun transformed the lone image into the first Slenderman story, albeit in a non-linear and fragmented form. Following this initial appearance, the Slenderman character was then picked up by others, who either fit him into their own narratives or wrote their short accounts of alleged encounters with the character, sculpting, as they did, a form of mythos. The day after Sun posted, a user named Code5 posted a photo with a backstory featuring Slenderman. By 14th of June, a user named Trenchmall had used Slenderman in his own story. A user known as Theo posted a story about a figure in Germany who stalked children at the edge of trees, just barely out of reach in the forest, providing an inventive history. On June 20th of the same year, Slenderman became the subject of a YouTube video series based upon an early, somewhat awful post by user Troy Ragnar. The series, which alleges to the details of the interactions with Slenderman, remain hazy and blurry to this day. This series of videos was supported by Twitter feeds and second YouTube channels, allowing the character to move from being a text image and a form-based phenomenon, becoming an ARG, with the character now being referred to, discussed, and modified across a number of different platforms and modalities by an ever-growing number of contributors. And this is the Slenderman story. After waking up with a jolt, the girl laid in bed a few seconds longer, reaching over to switch on her bedside lamp. She tried to remember exactly what had stolen her sweet slumber away when she couldn't. The brunette swung her legs over the side of the bed and heaved herself up, checking the time on her phone. She snorted when she saw it was midnight, the witching hour. Knowing that sleep would only evade her, she left her bed for the kitchen, a good cup of coffee on her mind as she passed by her front door. A chill spread like with liquid fire down her spine. It's only winter, she told herself, focusing again on the coffee plan. Measuring out scoops, water, and preparing her cup kept her occupied. But as the dark liquid boiled, she had nothing left to keep her mind from wandering off. The chill returning, and she couldn't help but glance behind her to the front door. It stood there innocently enough, just like always. The deadbolt was still in place, and she could see nothing amiss with it. Turning back to her coffee, she did her best to forget about the feeling she had just had. With her cup of coffee in hand, she started back towards her bedroom. As she walked by the front door, she decided that a quick glance out of the peephole would help calm her restless mind. The chill worsened with each step she took towards the door and further away from the safety and warmth of her blankets. She pressed her empty hand against the cold metal door and took a deep breath before leading her eyes to the peephole. At first, she could only see an inky blackness and somehow seemed to swirl in itself. When she blinked in surprise, the void melted away. She wished it hadn't. In its place, there stood what she could only guess was once a man. The limbs were long and inhumanly awkward, with bulky joints branching off into several arms, not unlike the branches of a tree. The creature was draped in a black tailored suit, somehow making the thing more nightmarish to her. The icing on the proverbial cake, however, was that past all of that, was the blank expression of a pale white face, the hellish thing's face. It was as though her mind blurred the ghastly visage to spare itself further shock and horror. She shoved herself away from the door, with the hand still pressed against it. The scalding mug of coffee fell, the liquid burning her bare leg as she fell backwards and tried to crawl away from the door. She knew, somehow, that her mind hadn't been playing tricks on her. As she walked away from the door, she watched as tendrils, as black as the void itself, the, the tendrils she first saw, snaked around through the cracks of the door. The girl was trapped between the instinct to flee and the gut feeling to not turn her back on the door. When the door jolted, the urge to flee overcame her, and she slipped in the burning liquid as she tried to make it back to her room. She knew deep down that she was trapping herself in a corner, but she had to get away from the door. The girl was halfway down the hallway when she heard the previously locked door creak open. She screamed and slipped into a wall, cracking her chin on it and stunning her. After that, there was only blackness. Nicole, a warm male voice, snapped the woman out of her trance as she turned around. She was met by one of her sister's doctors. She nodded, not sure if she should say anything, or even if she could find her voice. If she did have anything to say at all. That morning, she had gotten an urgent phone call from the hospital saying that her sister Lindsay was there. Before they had even let her see her, the doctor had pulled her off to the side and insisted that they talk to her about what happened. Phrases like self-inflicted and assault had been thrown around, and Nicole felt her mind reel. She still hadn't fully understood what they had been saying until she saw Lindsay with her own eyes. Her little sister had a bandage wrapped around her head, covering both of her ears as well as her eyes. They said it was to keep her now deadened eyes from drying out and trying to keep infection out of the wounds Lindsay had made to her ears. The doctor had guessed that either she or someone else had jammed a pencil into them to keep her off balance or to defend themselves or to deafen themselves against something. There was the mix of first and second degree burns on her hands, legs, and feet from what was assumed to be the coffee her neighbors found slipped all over the entire apartment. As Nicole walked into her sister's hospital room the first time, she thought she had spied the silhouette of a man in the window that she knew was impossible. Her sister's room was on the third floor of the hospital. Hmm. I guess that's one story. The Slenderman one's kind of broken up into parts. Much of the fascination with Slenderman is rooted in the overall aura of mystery that he is warped in. Despite the fact that it is rumored he kills children almost exclusively, it is difficult to say whether or not his only objective is slaughter. Oftentimes, it is either reported or recorded that he can be found in sections of woods, and these genuinely tend to be suburbs. He also has been reported to be seen with large groups of children, as many photographs portray. It is commonly thought that he resides in the woods and forest and preys on lonely children. He seems unconcerned with being exposed in the daylight or captured in photos. It is often thought as well that he enjoys stalking people who become overly paranoid about his existence, purposefully giving them glimpses of himself in order to further frighten them for this reason. It seems like Slenderman very much enjoys psychologically torturing his victims. He also often appears to float or drift around rather than walk, which suggests the possibility of him being an ethereal being rather than a creature or a man. This would also explain why he is able to remain mobile in spite of his poorly proportioned body. Even though Slenderman was fabricated on some awful form, or was he? Some people have already claimed sightings. He is seen mostly at night peering into open windows and walks out in front of lonely streetlights and secluded roads. His main intentions appear to be kidnapping children, as when he is seen near them in photographs, they usually disappear. Shortly afterwards, the Slender Man has also inspired many stories, such as those of marble hornets. In the end, though, his purpose remains unknown. An interesting take on Slenderman by a pasta member who's relying on the Marble Hornet series for evidence and facts. Quote, there's been a big misconception about my pal, the Slenderman, due to the appearance of the articles. He does not have hair or a face. Everything else is correct. There's also some questioning as to whether or not there is more than one. I find that unlikely though. It's most likely Slendy's fucking with your head in order to make you think that there's more than one, which he has been known to do. As for now, Slenderman has 3 or 4 known accomplices. These are Marble Hornets Hoodie, Masky, the Rake, and possibly the Observer. Not much is known yet, because the next episode of the Noah Maxwell ARG has not yet been released in the Marble Hornets ARG. Hoodie and Masky are possibly his followers in the Everyman Hybrid ARG. The Rake seems to be working with him, but we aren't really sure if that's true or not. Oh my god, this is getting kind of spooky, guys. It's getting kind of spooky. um, I actually never knew much about Slenderman, but this is kind of cool. Is he in Wisconsin? Probably, probably. Pretty much anywhere where there's woods, Slenderman's coming for you. Let's see. Man, there's a lot of mythology about Slenderman. Hmm. All right, I think we can move on to the next story. Let's see. By the way, if you guys want to leave any suggestions for creepypasta stories you want me to do, just make sure to leave that in the chat. Hmm. Oh. It's been almost 35 years since Danny's gruesome murder, and the killer has still not been caught. Some say that they never will be. Like many unexplained deaths in the area, Danny's untimely demise in that damp stretch of the forest will only be added to the ever growing list of missing people who simply do not exist anymore. And how they did all meet their end will never be solved. Some speculate that a local known murderer may be stalking the area, that he may have murdered him to hide out in the woods. A feral homeless man named Buck. He was someone who liked to build dugouts in the dirt and pretend that they were his fallout bunkers. But most believe that something else took Danny's life. Something that was not entirely human. And more than anything, they all believe that the evil that did kill Danny would never be stopped. Danny died in 1991. He was 7 years old. He had just moved to Dartmoor with his family. His father, Malcolm Vine, was a famous painter and had decided to scoop their family up from the deserty streets of Gulford in New Hampshire and move them to somewhere with more scenic vistas. That was how Malcolm that was how Malcolm described it to his family. Somewhere with brooding, rolling moors and deep valleys full of pine trees. Not somewhere with discarded beer cans clanging down desolate gray streets. Not somewhere with faded terraces and faded and left away houses and rusting warehouses. He wanted somewhere that was downright beautiful to wake up to. Danny's mother was a landscape designer. Her name was Debbie. She'd built up a small company from nothing, and some of her best clients were famous actors, musicians, and even politicians. So when Malcolm burst into their shabby townhouse one day and told her she was moving to somewhere with actual foliage, she was ecstatic. They were almost 50 and had decided it was time to wind down a little and start to enjoy the life they had built for themselves. It wasn't long until they found the perfect house for their family. It was a neat little cottage, wedged in between the terrace houses of a Morton homestead in Dartmoor. Sorry, that's a long word. Its white masonry walls were all slanted, having been built on a hill sometime 2 centuries ago. The thatched roof had a distinct bowing in the middle of it, but it had character. That was what Debbie had said when they viewed it. 4 cute little bay windows and a heavy Victorian inspired front door completed the front of the house. The door even had an elegant brass knocker for a doorbell. Everything they had wanted for their next chapter of life in the countryside, with their 2 children, Daniel and Robert, Danny and Bob. When the sale was agreed, they moved to their new life in July of 1991, around the time that Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested after the remains of 11 men and boys were found in his Milwaukee apartment. They settled in quickly, and the local community soon realized and recognized to love them. Malcolm Vine had a few fans down there anyway, and they were not too shy to ask for a personalized painting from him, for which he gladly obliged. It was no bother for him. He could easily finish a painting a day with his unique work ethic and talent. Debbie didn't take too long to participate in local gardening projects and even helped design the Market Town Center's foliage campaign. Danny and Bobby joined the local primary school in September. Danny started in year 2, and Bobby started in year 5. They both made friends easily. Danny had a curious innocence about him, and he was interested in almost everything. Even though he was only 7 years old, he was incredibly intuitive and would talk to a great deal of people. He would talk a lot about his parents, about nature and animals. Danny was a lot like his mother, unusual yet strangely charming in many ways. Bobby was a little older and was more like his father. He was active and athletic, always looking for a reason to compete with somebody. Yet, he was also very creative and would often write short stories purely to entertain himself on those hushed, rainy Sundays at the house. Life was good for all of them, but it did not last. Hey Shay, glad to see you could show up. Good to see you guys. Sorry, I'm just looking over the chat. Anyways, it was a brisk autumn day when the family went for a walk with their new dog. Mid-October, they had driven to Fernworthy Forest in Reservoir to let Rufus the dog stretch his legs with his new family. It was only 10 miles away from their home. The forest was long and dark. It stretched on for miles and miles of nothing but dense and thick forest that straddled the manufactured reservoir and eventually the wide open dump upland of the moors. They'd pulled up near the boathouse on the reservoir at about 10. They all got out, and Rufus scampered around their feet, as excited dogs like to do. While they all sorted themselves out, they put on their padded coats, and Bobby helped Danny zip up his puffer jacket, smirking and play fighting with him. Then they started walking south, towards the deep valley. Rufus ran off ahead, wagging his furry tail back and forth behind him. Rufus was a mongrel breed between sheepdog, border collie, and a Labrador. As such, he acted like all three at once. He was a dog, constantly thrilled by anything. They'd been walking about an hour when they came to the tallest part of the forest. The low white light from the weakened sun flittered through the gnarled branches. Malcolm and Debbie chatted casually about how best to decorate the living room and what paint would look good over the fireplace. Bobby jogged around with Rufus and threw sticks for him to fetch, but Danny was nervous. He'd never liked forests. There was just something about them that made him feel exposed. He often read nature books and knew that predators use stealth and camouflage to attack their prey. What's better camouflage than a forest? But that wasn't what bothered him about them. After all, there were no bears or wolves or other carnivorous predators. So that wasn't what upset him. Instead, there was just something unnerving about the presence of the forest that really bothered Danny. He didn't like how the trees seemed to stop swaying when they walked past. He particularly didn't like how he couldn't hear any other animals. Danny hung especially close to his mother, where she even acknowledged his anxiety as she talked with his dad. She gently reached down and stroked the top of the boy's head. She tussled around with his light blonde hair as she chatted, and somehow he felt much better. She had that effect on him. As much as he loved his dad, he felt much safer with his mother. But as much as his mother's affection temporarily helped, he still felt strangely on edge. As far back as he could remember, he felt that there was something different within him. He could hear and feel things that no one else seemed to. He felt those unexplained presences all around him. He imagined that he had a strange and unexplained connection to this unknown force that was seemingly hiding in every dark place. Danny just did not like the shroud of the forest. His young imagination ran away with him, and he thought that there was something else out there, a ghostly being made of mass and twigs, or something akin to a swamp monster like the ones he had read about in comics. And if Danny did not stay vigilant, the thing from the trees would come and snatch him away, right from his mother's grasp. Fernworthy Forest was an ancient sprawl of trees, deep valleys, and trickling streams, all aged over the spruce and pine. Even the damp floor was a lurid green moss. Danny thought that the forest looked like somewhere dinosaurs would be wandering around. As Malcolm and Debbie held hands and smiled softly at each other, Danny felt the anxiety rising in his stomach. Every time he looked up at the unending rows of trees, he'd imagine seeing that monster between the branches, something slinking from behind the trees, something hiding just out of sight. He had enough and he wanted to go home. He tugged at his mother's coat, and she then leaned down to him. "Hello, dear," she smiled at Danny with that unmistakable warmth only parents can give. Danny could not meet her gaze. "Yes?" she prodded gently. He was half embarrassed, half scared. He winced and looked at the floor. "Oh dear, are you okay?" she then asked as she kneeled down to him. Malcolm came around and also leaned down to his son. "What's wrong, kiddo?" asked Malcolm asked Danny. Nothing," Danny began to say, but stopped, looking back up at the tree line of the ridge. "Oh, he's just a little bit nervous," Debbie finished for him. Bobby had heard the conversation and stopped playing with Rufus to run up to his little brother. "What's that? Danny's nervous?" Bobby asked their mother. "Only a little bit," she replied. "Why?" Bobby asked while looking at Danny. "He doesn't like the forest that much, Bobby, you know that," their mother told him. Bobby then rolled his eyes and threw his stick away for Rufus to go and fetch. "Don't worry, Danny, they're only trees. They can't move or anything." And Danny suddenly felt incredibly embarrassed at all the attention he was receiving. He huddled into the side of his mother's coat and rubbed his cold nose against her hips. "I am fine. I like trees, honestly," he said, to f- trying to find the confidence. "You want to go back?" his dad asked. "Nope," Danny said and tried to smile, more of an attempt to ward off the unwanted fuss he was receiving. "Hey, I got an idea," Bobby chirped. "I'll call Danny that way. I'll carry Danny that way. That way he won't be nervous." "That's a great idea, isn't it, Danny boy?" Danny nodded sheepishly and let go of his mother's hand. Bobby then gleefully ran over to Danny and turned his back on him. He held his hands down and back in preparation to catch Danny's legs. Danny climbed on his brother, and Bobby caught him. He then shuffled and hoisted Danny on full. Bobby started marching up the gravel path, and the pair took off in front of their parents like a little rocket made of puffer jackets. Debbie chuckled as she watched them and went back to holding hands with her husband. "Not too fast," Debbie called after them. Bobby was incredibly strong for his age. He seemed to almost be supernaturally so. He steamed up the hill with Danny on his back. Danny was made of feathers, practically extremely light. The blur of the darkened trees bounced past Danny's vision as he swayed from side to side on Bobby's back. In an instant, Danny felt his fears melt away, like it was butter on a hot pan. He then wondered why he was so nervous at all. It was ridiculous. There was nothing out there. Bobby was right. They were just trees. They couldn't move. Danny wanted to prove to Bobby that he was no longer scared to keep that feeling of confidence. "I'll carry you now," Danny exclaimed. "Huh?" Bobby replied. "I'll carry you now. Put me down and I'll show you." Bobby stood there, with his hands on his hips, breathing heavily, ignoring the single bead of sweat rolling down his forehead. Bobby stopped walking, and Danny then slid off his back onto his own 2 feet. Bobby then turned around and saw that Danny had that mischievous look on his face. The grin always meant that Danny wanted to compete with him. Bobby liked it whenever Danny was in these kinds of mood. in these kinds of moods. He loved nothing more than play fighting and subtly proving himself against his younger brother. I bet you can't go as fast as me, Bobby announced with a smirk. Bet I can, Danny replied. They took turns giving each other piggyback rides up and down the path in front of their parents. And Bobby was surprised that Danny could match him in strength. He was useful, and also he was impressed by his brother, that he was almost as strong as himself, even though Danny was younger. After another hour of walking, the family came to a little piece of history right in the middle of the forest. In a small clearing between the trees stood 27 granite slabs, arranged into a perfect circle. It looked in on the one big boulder in the middle. On the middle boulder, there were ancient glyphs. Fernworthy Crane Circle was a Bronze Age ritual circle where ancient shamans were said to come and sacrifice small animals back in the day. When the forest was young, the vines didn't know that the whole of Dartmoor, although outwardly pleasant and striking with its beautiful landscapes, was steeped in a deep rooted history of black magic. Everything from witches to demonic possession, demons, it was all said to have originated from those moors. Having just moved to the area, they were unaware of the strange folk tales that lingered over Dartmoor, like a perpetual fog. But they would all soon learn the truth. The family stopped at the sight and just looked at it. Malcolm was more intrigued than off put by the stone circle. He didn't even know it was there. He didn't see any mentions of any historical sites on the map before they had set off from their car. Rufus the dog, however, lowered his head and cowered. His tail fell between his hind legs, and he began to whimper loudly. There was something about the circle that made him scared. Malcolm looked up to the sky. Without the shield of trees, Malcolm couldn't help but notice just how low and gray it was. The clouds were dark and laden with foreboding. It looked like it would rain soon. We should probably head back now, Malcolm said to Debbie, looking across at her. Looks like rain is coming soon. I think so too. We've walked for 2 hours. That's enough to warrant a glass of wine, isn't it? Debbie replied with a wink. How about a whole bottle instead? Malcolm chatted back, wrapping one arm around her and pulling her tight. Now you're speaking my language, Debbie replied. Right. Bobby, Danny, Malcolm shouted playfully. We're off. Let's get out of here. However, while the couple had been chatting, they hadn't noticed that Danny had approached the stone circle. He had wandered up to the first stone alone. Rufus barked nervously at everyone as Danny crossed over the perimeter, but Danny didn't hear the dog. He was too enamored with the stones. Almost in a trance, he wanted to pay attention to it. He didn't want to look at anything else. He walked past one of them and, almost as if he were in some trance, reached out to brush his fingers lightly across the rough, abrasive ancient slab. His footsteps were slow and serene. When he reached the circle center, he stood there and glanced up at the monolith. There he saw, carved into the middle stone, a spiral. It was a snake eating its tail. Danny stared at it, hypnotized, and the world fell silent around him. He didn't understand what the symbol meant, but was fascinated by it nonetheless. He felt as if he'd seen it somewhere before, but he could not say for certain. Danny, Bobby shouted from behind him, snapping him out of his lull. Come on, we're going home. Okay, Danny replied, absently, still not taking his gaze away from the stone carvings. Danny, if you hurry, I'll get you a Coke, Malcolm called to him. Coming, Danny said, as he then turned away from the strange glyphs and the brooding stone. He walked back out of the circle and back to his family. They all turned around and headed back down the gravel path. Standing in the knee-high grass from the tree line behind them, the dark evil thing watched. Its lips drew back hungrily at the promise of the feeding to come. The family headed back down the track that they'd all worked very hard climbing. The wind cut through the trees mercilessly all around them. The temperature had dropped, and everyone was getting tired. The enjoyment from the trek had left them a while back. There was less talking now, and Malcolm sighed frequently. Rufus sauntered around in front of them, sniffing and urinating on various rocks. Danny was dragging his heels as he walked sullenly behind his mother and his father. They all wanted to get back to the car and back into their warm, cozy house as soon as possible, but not Bobby. Bobby was still full of energy. He danced around them and asked his mother an interminable stream of questions. She had lost the desire to reply with enthusiasm and instead resigned herself to grunting and shrugging her shoulders at her son's requests. Hey, Mom, how big is a blue whale? Bobby squawked. I don't know, dear. 10 meters? Not feeling satisfied with the response, he then turned his attention to Danny and challenged him to a game of hide and seek. His parents had continued walking down the path ahead of them. Danny, hide and go seek, he said. What? Danny replied absently. We haven't played it in ages. You hide first, and we'll see who can find the other the quickest, Bobby says, as he jogged backwards in front of Danny. Danny didn't reply at first. He was away with his thoughts. Something about crossing over that stone circle perimeter had made him feel unease again. Bobby didn't notice, though. Yeah, you go. 10 seconds to hide. Ultimate ninja stuff, Bobby said. But Danny could not stop thinking about those strange, unnatural symbols on the rocks. What did they mean? Who were they for? Where had he seen them before? Okay, Danny muttered. Okay, close your eyes. Danny did obediently. The world went black for a few seconds, and he walked all the same, imagining himself coming before that strange symbol again. While Danny's eyes were locked shut, Bobby had taken off and practically divided into the dark, desolate woods just off the main path. A few moments were when Bobby scrambled around in the underbrush. Then nothing. Bobby was silent and laid still under the leaves. Danny trotted on down the gravel path and reluctantly obliged to his brother's masquerade. He spotted him eventually and called him out. Bobby, got you. No fair, Bobby said after bolting up from the back-end tree. You were looking. Was not. They played hide and seek for another 10 minutes. When it was Danny's turn, he'd jog and hide behind a tree. When it was Bobby's turn, he went a little further and would crawl down into ditches to hide. Their parents were much further ahead now, both clearly eager to get back to the car. The forest seemed bigger to Danny. He thudded along, and all the trees seemed to grow bigger and bigger around them. Danny tried to ignore it and catch up to his parents while still playing with Bobby, but then something else happened. He ran off into the woodland to the right on Bobby's last go. Danny has closed his eyes for what seemed like only a few seconds. Danny listened carefully to the sound of the wind rustling the branches all around him, and then there was a strange silence that followed. 3, 2, 1. Bobby had crowded from somewhere in his peripheral vision. Danny's eyes bulged open, and suddenly he couldn't see anyone anymore. Bobby's voice then drifted off into the wind. Danny was alone now. There was just the unending sprawl of trees before him. He stood there on the path, all of it looming down onto him. They had all disappeared, but how? His family was not 100 meters away from him 5 seconds ago. He couldn't even see their shapes further down the track. Danny looked around, utterly perplexed by what had just happened. He took a few more nervous steps forward. "Hello?" Danny called out quietly. "Bobby? Mom? Dad?" They were gone. Fallen autumn leaves stirred around his feet, the wind flittering against his hair gently through the pine leaves, and the trees swayed back and forth slowly all around. The path in front of him was the only path he could see. A dead straight bolt of mud and gravel carved its way through the deep and gloomy woods. Danny could see all the way down the track, but still, there was no people on it. He could not see his family anywhere, not even Rufus the dog. Now suddenly, Danny felt stricken with incredible anxiety and loneliness. Danny's low self-esteem made him wonder whether his family had abandoned him on purpose. Maybe Bobby had planned this all along to trick Danny into shutting his eyes so they could all run away joyfully from the forest and leave him there alone. Danny walked all alone. The fading sunlight was slanting its way through the canopies onto him. Layers of thick, milky mist swam through the pine trees, covering up everything in the middle of the distance. He skulked down the muddy path with his head bowed at the thought and wondered whether they would all be waiting for him back at the car. A big joke to scare poor little Danny. It had been almost 2 hours since Danny got separated from his family. He'd been aimlessly walking around that same lonely path, looking for them for what felt like all day. Yet the path had not changed at all. Every time Danny thought he was coming to the end of it, he looked up and saw that he could not see the forest's edge. His heart sank, and he felt like crying. The track seemingly repeating itself repeatedly in front of him, like he was on a hamster wheel. He called out a few times, but heard nothing. A small tear ran down his face. Part of him hoped that they would all spring out of the bushes gleefully and laugh at any minute, having pulled a gag on him, a joke at his expense. Bobby would leap up with a big grin and shout, "I win, you couldn't find me." That didn't happen. Danny continued roaming forward. It started to get dark. The forest was growing dimmer. Shafts of light from the dying sun began to fade from white to amber and down to a molten brown. Danny saw silhouettes of bugs flying around in the dwindling rays. It was getting colder, too. It was at this point that Danny started to feel truly terrified. What if night fell? What if he had to spend it huddled under a fallen tree? What if his mother and father never came looking for him? A string of what ifs swam through Danny's mind. He gulped, and the thick, heavy stone in his stomach dropped. He was finally able to articulate why he was scared of the forest. It was because it was so easy to get lost. Danny tried to calm his racing thoughts and decided to pick up a small fallen branch. The wood was soggy and had clumps of fungus on it. To make himself feel better, he pretended the dead piece of wood in his hands was a rifle, and he was on a patrol in an army. He was a soldier marching through the forest, and he was not scared. He gripped the length of the wood and held it, outstretched in front of him like he was looking down its sights, imagining that every now and then an enemy would jump out at him, and he dispatched them with a few quick shots. Danny pretended it was camouflage. He had put on his rifle, so it was harder for his enemies to spot him, but that only distracted him for a little while. After another 10 minutes, he tossed the stick away and sighed heavily, remembering just where he was and how utterly alone he was. Danny called out again. He shouted his parents' name. He just wanted to go home. He wanted his bed and cup of hot chocolate. He called out for Bobby too, but there was no reply. Danny traipsed forward. The crawling shadows followed him since the stone circle slid ever closer. It was almost time. After the silhouette of the sun fell behind the flat wall of black trees, Danny stopped walking. He couldn't hold it any longer. The forest was darker than he ever thought possible, only silhouettes of pine trees giving any sort of definition against the inky blackness of dawn. Danny cried. Tears streamed down his young and blistered face. It was almost night, and he knew that his chances of leaving the woods before then were very slim. Danny stepped off the main track and went and sat on a lone tree stump in the middle of the mire. The chilly air was beginning to suck the warmth from Danny's body. He brushed the mud from his chin and tried to control his crying. He thought about what he should do. Perhaps he could use some fallen branches or a quilt. He stuffed his cold hands into the pockets of his jacket and buried his head in his chest. As he sat on the stump alone, it was then that he heard something completely out of place in a forest, a sharp clinking of metal against metal, the snapping of bolts. Could have only come from some locking mechanism. It came from behind them. Danny turned and looked over his shoulders, and there he saw something. He gasped when he did. There against the gloom was a frail old man standing in the underbrush. Bracken and grass blew gently around his legs. He wore a large waxed farmer's jacket and had these dirty big brown wheelies on his feet. In front of him was an old footlocker. It was a great dark thing, encased in faded black leather and wooden corners. The withered old man was locking it up in the middle of the moss-strewn forest. He craned over it and labored as he checked the first latch. Then he heaved and sat upon it like some weary traveler, scrubbing the sweat from his brow as he did. Danny sat on the tree stump and just watched him. He frowned and was curiously intrigued by this person. He did not know what was behind him. The old man groaned, sighed, and didn't acknowledge Danny until he spoke. Mister, are you okay? Danny asked the old man. When he did, the figure in the dark stood upright as if alarmed by Danny's presence. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't notice you there, the old man replied. He then continued with his tasks. Yes, I'm just fine, young man. I can't get this damn lock to work. It's running me around the ring. The old man struggled and tried to pull the second latch down to meet the lock. What is it? Danny asked, glancing down at the thick black slab in the woods. Looks like a coffin. The old man smiled and shook his head in embarrassment. Well, it's all of my things. It's everything I own in this wretched little chest. Danny looked around, unconvinced by the stranger's statement. But why are you in the forest? The old man looked up at Danny and gave an apologetic smirk. I live here, Danny frowned. You live in the woods? The curious old man nodded. Unfortunately, yes, it's the only place I can live. Why? Well, he said as he reached into his pocket and produced a cigarette, it's the only place on earth that will have me. Danny watched as the old man struck a match and lit his cigarette. From the effulgence of the match, Danny saw the old man's face. It was tired and tattered. His eyes were sunken in and his skin was wrinkled and shallow. The glazed over sheen on his irises made Danny think of boiled eggs or something else that had faded. He was a sad old thing, and Danny felt sorry for him. Were you sitting there the whole time? Danny asked. I mean, as I was. The old man blew out a plum of smoke and looked at the floor. No. I've been dragging this thing through the trees for a long time. I only stopped here to take some rest. I didn't know anyone else was here. He looked up at Danny with an unmistakable warmth that made Danny think of his mother. The stranger's eyes glowed as he smiled sheepishly at Danny. If I'd have known, I wouldn't have disturbed you. It's okay, mister. I'm alone too. You are? The old man asked. He craned his head to look at Danny. Yeah, I was here with my family and now they're all gone. Oh dear, the stranger said as he raised, as if protruded by Danny's statement. Well, that's not good. Are you saying you're lost? Danny looked up. He looked away, the blackness of the forest, the darkness. That wall of trees rose deep and dark, impenetrable all around him. Yes, he said. I was with them when we played hide and seek, and it was my brother's turn, and when I opened my eyes again, they were all gone. That's awful. To leave you like that, not good, the old man snarled. I think it was a mistake. I don't think they would leave me, Danny replied apologetically. No, the old man hissed. His eyes seemed darkened. No, Bobby wouldn't do that to me. The old man laughed maniacally. Oh, but he did. The old man then stood up and leered over Danny. He suddenly appeared to be very virile and full of strength, as if something had awakened within him. Danny could smell the old, crushed sweat on the man. His old eyes began to glow unnaturally, as if catching the moon's wandering. The skin around his face began to move and squirm like worms were burrowed under. His ears twitched and his hair started to pulsate. You don't think your family left you? Well then, let's prove it. The old man took hold of Danny's wrist and pulled him a few steps forward. He twisted it unmercifully as he tugged Danny deeper into the woods. Ow, you're hurting me, Danny said. Malcolm, I've got your boy. He's here with me. Come here and I'll give him to you. He's here with me. The stranger screamed upwards into the sky. He bellowed and shouted like a banshee at the stars, like some deranged rabid wolf. Malcolm, I've got your boy. Come on, come get him. As the old man yanked him further into the trees, Danny smelled the stench of the stranger even more, this lonesome stink radiating from under his jacket. The old man smelled like marsh. It was a harsh concentration of tobacco smokes, cider, crescendo, and mud. Danny tried to wriggle away from his grasp, but the old stranger clenched tightly. The old man looked down at him, his eyes smoldering now like fiery coals locked in a furnace. Oh, don't be scared, my boy. It's not like your family has abandoned you or anything. They haven't. My mom is right over there. The old man leaned in further. Are they? Have they not left you? Answer me this little loan. If your family cares for you so much, why are you standing here alone in the marsh? Because I ran off. The old man snarled. Ran off? You did. But you touched the stone back there, and I came for you. And you know what, little lost lamb? What? Danny answered meekly. I am so hungry, you know. I've been in here for a long time. I've not had a decent meal for years. I am so ravenous that I could literally feast upon the bark of the trees. The stranger then cocked his head downwards at the poor little lost Danny. Danny looked up at the stranger's face in the darkness. Danny whimpered, screaming every which way. Danny reeled back and tried to escape. He pulled his arm away from the old man, but the dark presence loomed down upon him. It's not like your family will miss you, is it? After all, they left you here. The old man crowed. He then leaned in and sniffed Danny. Soon, like all the others, you shall live in that chest. Your soul will belong to me forever. Danny yelped as he tried to push him away. The old man's face peeled back from his skull. Underneath the flaps of skin was a pale surface made of wreathing tentacles. Down the middle of the skull was a slit that was its mouth. It opened up sideways. Danny screeched. He stared up, utterly horrified, as the churning mass of worms where the old man's face used to be. Danny screamed. They echoed up into the night, but no one heard them. Police constable discovered the remains of Danny just after sunrise on that cold, wet autumn day. That changed the family's lives forever. The police had been scouring the woods all night with sniffer dogs, and one of them had found the scene just after dawn. Just off the main track, there was a small puddle of blood sitting in it. It was Danny's ripped up coat. There was nothing else to find. Danny's family had reported him missing that evening and had joined the police search party throughout the night. When the police chief, Nolan, found the remains in the morning, he refused to let any of the family see them. He ordered the other constables to usher the family away. and get them back to the car. It was something wholly unnatural and not fit for anyone to look upon. He remained and kneeled in the underbrush, trying to maintain his composure as he looked down at the horror. The blood was gloopy and somehow bubbled like a source of gravy over a stove. Police Chief Nolan shuddered. What on earth could have done this? He whispered to himself as he looked down at the pool of simmering primordial blood. Later that day, the forest was cordoned off, and it was all over the local news. Police officers stood in the rain around the perimeter, and forensics were in and out of the scene. There was nothing to find. No one could stomach the investigation. The case would be the end of many of the detectives' careers. There was a large token funeral for Danny a week later. The whole town came out to show their support for the troubled family. The police never found anything, and the local folk could only speculate what killed Danny. The local folk shuddered even to think that something could ever happen in this area. The years drew by like a knife, and everyone but the family slowly forgot about Danny's horrific disappearance, mainly out of fear. They all chose not to acknowledge such an event. Everyone but the family forgot about Danny. Everyone but Bobby. It had been 35 years since Danny was murdered, and Bobby has never stopped looking for the killer. Driven by an insatiable rage-filled desire to solve it, Bobby soon joined the local police force. It did not take long for him to be promoted to Detective Chief Inspector. Now, 35 years later, on the anniversary of Danny's death, Bobby Vine knows who, or more to the point, what killed his brother all those years ago. After exhausting every lead and ruling out every suspect, all his research and investigations now point to only one possibility. When the sun sets over Dartmoor, he will go back into the forest to confront it. All right, guys. That was an interesting story. Did you guys like that one? I hope I did that one some justice, and I hope you liked it. Sorry if my voice sounds a little hoarse. I'm like a little bit dehydrated. I swear I usually sound better. That is a spooky story, though. That's my first time reading it. You guys might want to check it out. It's called, what's the title of this? It's called It Came from the Forest. Ah, my. You guys are nice. I'm glad you guys liked it. Now, let's move on to the next one. The Caregiver of Graft. I don't want to do too long of one because we're already an hour and 20 minutes in. Let's see. Mm. You missed like a good chunk of the live, but don't worry. We're moving on to the next stage. Sorry, I listen, I got back from my sister's and I immediately just started rushing around. I haven't even um drinking water yet. I've just been busy trying to set up the stream very last second. I'm so sorry. Anyways, on to the next story, but I'm going to go grab some water. So we're gonna take a small break and then we'll go do more story stuff. So yeah, okay, we're just gonna be right back. Welcome, one and all. Welcome back. Sorry, let me just pull up the story again. Let me pull up the chat. Hello, everybody. I am very glad that you're enjoying this. Remember, if you guys like this, make sure to comment, like, subscribe, consider donating as it funds the channel and everything that I do. All donation links are in the description, and make sure to go check out my Patreon. Now let's continue with this story. I've got a short little story here that you're all so sure to love. So let's get into it. Have you ever been influenced by clothing? I I don't mean confidence by a look. Have you ever been given more control than ever by an item? Or a truth? Or just your favorite shirt? Have you ever been influenced in the worst way? By showing the truth. The following is taken directly from journal entries. The entries were written by a notorious but unknown killer. He is notorious in the means that everyone has seen his work. He is unknown because nobody knows that he has done it. His origin is unusual, no trouble, no evil family, no magic or paranormal farce. His life was chosen by him and him alone. His identity is also unknown. He will be known from here on as the Hooded Man or the Hoodie. It's been April 3rd, 2004. It's been really cold around here. I don't have anything really to cover myself. All I have are my t-shirts and jeans. So today I decided to get a jacket. I was just in a local store, nothing special. It's a black hoodie with a white lining. I think it looks pretty cool. And when I tried it on, the attendant said it suited me fine. And I said thanks to be polite. Common courtesy is so hard to find. So I bought it. I haven't taken it off yet. Not only is it warm, but I can really see myself doing amazing things in it. When I look in the mirror, I smirk, I feel amazing. I can't really explain it, but I like it. I really like it. I feel the need to put my hood up. Something about the hood has a way of masking a person. Even though it shows their face, it hides something somewhere. It's really late right now. I've been feeling so great all day. Time just flew around me. I'll have to explain even more tomorrow, though. April 10th. I've had a hell of a week. I felt so great. I walked the halls just like a big shot. I'm sure I looked smug. That's why Jack challenged me. He was so angry. He's always he's always ignoring teachers and insulting me. But this time I responded with a shrewd comment about someone's family. He antagonized me. After all, so. And, he was asking for it. He threw a hard punch and I stood. It stung harder than before when I actually argued with him. I felt so cool all week. My confidence kept me up. I punched him hard in the stomach and I lifted him up with an underhook. It felt so good. It really did. Oh, parents calling. Next entry. April 14th. Jack still isn't out of the hospital. They said he's in a lot of pain. He spit out a lot of blood. His parents told me over the phone. I reflected on it, on how great it felt when my first punch connected with him. How his cracked scream sounded. That's good to hear. I don't care about Jack. I smiled at his pain. I keep staring at my mirror. I'm always wearing my hoodie. It feels so empowering. My friends would laugh at what I say. They would compare me to Spider-Man in his suit. Spider-Man threw his powers away. I don't plan on doing anything with my source of confidence. April 22nd. Jack has gone to a better place. The words rang through my ear. He's dead. He lost too much blood. His father told me the day I visited that he was losing blood due to personal health conditions, but the way his mother looked at me told me the real story. I killed him. I still remember the satisfaction of hitting him. I never wanted to kill him. I need to think about what I've done, right? That'll fix my feelings, but what is there to think about? Regret is a foolish emotion. I don't need regret. April 24th. Dad has been avoiding me lately, and Mom just tells me she loves me. They both want me to feel endless guilt, but I won't. I can't. I can fake it for the public, but I'm not sorry. Spider-Man's story is starting to make me think more. But why would a cursed or possessed hoodie land in my possession? It's not like a superpower. No. Everyone who knew Jack glares at me now. Everyone who I would talk to have transferred themselves out of my class or went to different schools. Teachers don't look at me much or get on to me if I'm breaking the rules. Today, I threw a pencil at my history teacher. It hit his shoulder. He just froze for a second and continued what he was doing. Everyone either hates me and probably wants me dead, or they fear me. My writing is the only comfort I have. I can be at peace and let myself go. April 25th. They provoked me. They threatened me. I had no choice. They would have killed me. My hood protected my face. The knife naturally moved from Rob's hand to mine. I didn't mean to. I, I didn't mean to. April 30th. 5 days. 5 days being interrogated and sleeping in a cell. They decided I was only defending myself. I can hear Mom and Dad talking. They want me gone. They're both scared. I was an idiot to think that this jacket of mine was possessing me or changing my personality. It's just a stupid, really cool jacket. I love how it looks. I feel like I remember how I put the hood up. I put it up when Jack challenged me. I put it up when those guys tried to kill me. I feel no remorse. I feel indifferent. I am in control. I finally come to realize insanity. I wanted to kill all of them. I needed only a push and the confidence to fight. I got it. Mom and Dad are irritating me. They always irritate me. Okay, so this is the end of the story. I told you it was short. It's a little sweet story. I never heard this one before, but I guess this one's about Hoodie. Uh, Damn, I wanted to do Marble Hornets, but the problem is it's a online series, so it doesn't really have a story to go off of. But yeah, I hope you liked that one. That one was like read as if it was journal entries. It was pretty fun. I get to be a little psycho. Death Note's a great anime. Why do I feel a sudden urge to buy a hoodie for some reason? No, I'm just kidding. Let's see. What's the next one I have? Wow, that's all the ones I did for. Oh, no, wait, this one. No. Okay. Let me just start up this. I want to do marble horns eventually. Should I start like on polls on weekends? Maybe I should start adding this as an option to read creepypastas. See if people want me to do those on weekends now, because it seems like you guys are really enjoying. Michael Afton ASMR win. Ooh, okay. So I would do one, but the problem is I don't really write the scripts, so I kind of have to, talk to somebody about writing one, and that costs the months, and even or I could wait for someone to make one or suggest it, and then that might take months. So I'll find one eventually. I've been searching. Uh, okay. Pursuit of the elderly, fire and brimstone, planted seed. Sorry, I'm looking through all these creepy pastas. Ooh, Sally face. Jennifer Leo, I'm on my knees begging. Dude, you really want me to do a Michael Afton one? I might write one. It's not like I haven't written scripts before. I just don't like to. When you see William Afton, you shake with fear. All right, fair enough. I'm trying to look for a story. Actually, what's in the top ranked for creepypasta? Because I'm on the original old website. Let's see, archives, popular creepypastas. Let's do it. Ooh, I haven't seen some of these in years. I feel so old. Okay, this one's not that long. Oh, this is going to be nice. Did I ever tell you guys about a little experiment? Russian researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people awake for 15 days using an experimental gas based stimulation. They were kept in a sealed environment to carefully monitor their oxygen intake so the gas didn't kill them, since it was toxic in high concentrations. This was before closed circuit cameras, so they had only microphones and 5-inch thick glass porthole sized windows into the chamber to monitor them. The chamber was stocked with books, cots to sleep on, but no bedding, running water and toilets, and enough dried food to last all 5 or over a month, I guess. The test subjects were political prisoners deemed enemies of the state during the war. Everything was fine for the first 5 days. The subjects hardly complained, having been promised falsely that they would be freed if they submitted to the test and did not sleep for 30 days. And their conversations and activities were monitored, and it was noted that they continued to talk about increasingly traumatic incidences in their past, and the general tone of their conversations took on a darker aspect after the 4 day mark. After 5 days, they started to complain about the circumstances and events that led them to where they were, and started to demonstrate severe paranoia. They stopped talking to each other and began alternatively whispering to the microphone in one-way mirrored portholes. Oddly, they all seemed to think they could win the trust of the experimenters by turning over their comrades, the other subjects in captivity with them. At first, the researchers suspected that this was an effect of the gas itself. After 9 days, the first of them started screaming. He ran the length of the chamber, reportedly yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight. He continued attempting to scream, but was only able to produce occasional squeaks. The researchers postulated that he had physically torn his vocal cords. The most surprising thing about this behavior is how the other captives reacted to it, or rather, didn't react to it. They continued whispering to the microphones until the second of the captives started to scream. The non screaming captives took the books apart, smeared pages after pages with their own feces and blood, and pasted them calmly over the glass portholes. The screaming promptly stopped. So did the whispering and the microphone. And after 3 more days passed, the researchers checked the microphones hourly to make sure they were working, since they thought it impossible that no sound could be coming with 5 people inside. The oxygen intake in the chamber indicated that all 5 must still be alive. In fact, it was the amount of oxygen 5 would consume at a very heavy level of strenuous exercise. On the morning of the 14th day, the researcher did something that they said would not they would never do to get the captive's reaction. They used the intercoms inside the chambers, hoping to provoke any response from the captives. They were afraid they were either dead or vegetables. They announced, "We are opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor, or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom." I should have done a Russian accent. Anyways. To their surprise, they heard a single phrase in a calm voice response respond, "We no longer want to be freed." Debate broke out amongst the researchers and the military forces funding the research, unable to provoke any more responses using the intercoms. It was finally decided to open the chamber at midnight on the 15th day. The chamber was flushed of the stimulation gas and filled with fresh air, and immediately voices from the microphone began to object. 3 different voices began begging, as if pleading for the life of loved ones, to turn the gas back on. The chamber was open as soldiers sent in to retrieve the test subjects. They began to scream louder than ever, and so did the soldiers when they saw what was inside. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, although no one could rightfully call the state that they were in life. The food rations past day 5 had not been so much as touched. There were chunks of meat from the dead test subjects' thighs and chest stuffed into the drain of the center of the chamber, blocking the drain and allowing 4 inches of water to accumulate on the floor. Precisely how much of the water on the floor was actually blood was never determined. All 4 surviving, quote unquote, test subjects also had large portions of muscle and skin torn away from their bodies. The destruction of flesh and exposed bones on their fingertips indicated that the wounds were inflicted by hand, not with teeth, as the researchers initially thought. Closer examination of the positions and angles of the wounds indicated that most, if not all of them, were self-inflicted. The abominable organ below the rib cage, the abdominal organ below the rib cage of all the 4 test subjects had been removed, while the heart, lungs, and diaphragm remained in place. And the skin and most of the muscles attached to the ribs had been ripped off, exposing the lungs through the rib cage. All the blood vessels and organs remained intact. They had been taken out and laid on the floor, fanning out around the eviscerated, still living bodies of the subjects. The digestive tract of all four could be seen to be working. Digesting food, it quickly became apparent that what they were digesting was their own flesh, and that they had ripped off and eaten over the course of days. Most of the soldiers were Russian special operatives at the facility, but still, many refused to return to the chamber to remove the test subjects. They continued to scream to be left in the chamber and ultimately begged and demanded that the gas be turned back on, lest they fall asleep. To everyone's surprise, the test subjects put up a fierce fight in the process of being removed from the chamber. One of the Russian soldiers died from having his throat ripped off, and an artery in his leg severed by one of the subject's teeth. Another 5 of the soldiers lost their lives, if you count ones that committed suicide in the weeks following the incident. In the struggle, one of the 4 living subjects had his spleen ruptured and he bled almost instantly until he could bleed no more. The medical researchers attempted to sedate him, but this proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times the human dose of morphine and still fought like a cornered animal, breaking the ribs and arms of one doctor. When heart was seen to beat for a full 2 minutes after he had bled out to the point there was more air in his vascular system than blood. Even after it stopped, he continued to scream and flail for another 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach, and just repeating the words more over and over, weaker and weaker, until he finally fell silent. The surviving 3 test subjects, the most injured of the 3, was taken to the only surgical operation room that the faculty had. In the process of preparing the subject to have his organs placed back within his body, it was found that he was effectively immune to the sedation they had given him, preparing him for the surgery. He fought furiously against his restraints when the anesthetic gas was brought out and put under him. He managed to tear most of the way through a 4-inch wide leather strap on one wrist, even though the weight of 200-pound soldiers were holding him down. His eyelids fluttered and closed. His heart stopped. In the autopsy of the test subject that died on the operating table, it was found that his blood had tripled the normal levels of oxygen. His muscles that were still attached to his skeleton were badly torn, and he had broken 9 bones in his struggle to not be subdued. Most of them were from his own force and his own exertion. The second survivor had been the first of the group of 5 to start screaming, his vocal cords destroyed. He was unable to beg or object to surgery, and he only reacted by shaking his head violently in disapproval. When the anesthetic gas was brought near him, he shook his head yes when someone suggested reluctantly they try the surgery without anesthesia, and did not react for the entire 6-hour procedure of replacing his abdominal organs and attempting to cover them with what remained of his skin. The surgeon presiding stated repeatedly that it should be medically possible for a patient to still be alive. One terrified nurse assisting the surgeon stated that she had seen the patient's mouth curl into a smile several times whenever his eyes met hers. When the surgery ended, the subject looked at the surgeon and began to wheeze loudly, attempting to talk while struggling. Assuming this must be something of a drastic importance to the surgeon, He had a pen and pad fetched so the patient could write his message. It was simple: keep cutting. The other two subjects were given the same surgery, both without anesthesia as well, although they had to be injected with a paralytic for duration of the operation. The surgeon found it impossible to perform the operation with the patients laughing continuously. Once paralyzed, the subjects could only follow the attending officer and researcher with their eyes. The paralytics cleared their system in an abnormally short period of time, and they were soon trying to escape their bonds. The moment they could speak, they were asked again for the stimulation of gas. The researcher tried asking why they had injured themselves, why they had ripped out their own guts, and why they wanted to be given the gas again. Only one response was ever given: I have to stay awake. All three subjects' restraint were reinforced. All the three subjects' restraints were reinforced, and they were placed back into the chambers, awaiting determination as to what should be done with them. The researcher faced the wrath of the military benefactor for having failed the stated goal of their project, considering enthu- euthanizing the surviving subjects. The commanding officer, a former KGB agent, instead saw potential and wanted to see what would happen if they were put back on the gas. The researchers strongly objected, but were overruled. In preparation for being sealed in the chamber again, the subjects were connected to an EEG monitor and had their restraints padded for long-term confinement. To everyone's surprise, all three stopped struggling the moment it was let slip that they were going back on the gas. It was obvious that at this point all three were putting up a great struggle to stay awake, but one of the subjects that could speak was humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject was straining his legs against the leather bands with all of his might. First left, then right, then left again for something to focus on. The remaining subject was holding his head off his pillow and blinking rapidly, having been the first to be wired for EEG. Most of the researchers were monitoring his brain waves in surprise. They were normal most of the time, but sometimes flatlined unexpectedly. It looked at as if he were repeatedly suffering from brain death before returning to normal. As they focused on paper scrolling out of the brainwave monitor, only one nurse saw his eyes slip shut at the same moment his head hit the pillow. His brainwaves immediately changed to that of deep sleep, then flatlined for the last time as his heart simultaneously stopped. The only remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed, and now his brainwaves showed the same flat line as one who had just died from falling asleep. The commander gave the order to seal the chamber with both subjects inside, as well as three researchers. One of the named three immediately drew his gun and shot the commander point blank between the eyes, then turned the gun on the mute subject and blew his brains out as well. He pointed the gun at the remaining subject, still restrained to a bed, as the remaining members of the medical research facility and team fled the room. I won't be locked in there. These things, not with you, he screamed, the man strapped to the table. What are you? What are you? I must know. The subject smiled. Have you forgotten so easily? We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal minds. We are what you hide from in your bed every night. We are what you sedate in silence and paralyze when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread. The researcher paused, then aimed at the subject's heart and fired. The EEG flatlined as the subject weakly choked out. So nearly free. Oh, that was fun. That was a good one. That was Russian sleep experiment, guys. Hope you guys like the Russian sleep experiment. That was a pretty creepy one, honestly. That was like really fucked up. Oh god, that was a fucked up one. I hope you guys enjoyed that. How long have I been streaming, by the way? I don't even know. Almost 2 hours. You know what? Let's just chill here for like a few minutes and then we'll end the stream. How are you guys doing? What's going on with you guys? I haven't been streamed since the other day. Hope you guys enjoyed that. The Russian sleep experiment. God, so grotesque, so disgusting. I hope you got a fright out of this. After all, scary Halloween is a good Halloween. Oh my god, train cones are like driving by. The train is just flying by right now. I don't even know. I don't think you guys can hear it, but there's a train by my house. Either way. So, if you guys liked this Halloween stuff, if you guys like this Halloween stuff and you guys want to see more of it in the future, make sure to comment, like, subscribe, or actually, if you just want to see more of this in general in the future, uh, then make sure to comment, like, subscribe. Consider donating as it funds the channel and everything that I do, and it's overall very, very helpful. Anyways, I think we're good. I think we can end the stream here. And remember, comment, like, subscribe, consider donating, and oh, check out the Patreon, and that's about it, actually. Oh, check out the Twitter, and the Discord link is usually posted in the chat somewhere. So just like, start scrolling through there and try to find the link. I hope you all had an amazing day. I hope you enjoyed this stream, and I hope you were terrified as hell, as I am. I hope you all have a great day. See you guys later.